This is a plunge router. They usually have two slide bars.
A lot of what we're discussing here will apply to a laminate trimmer as well, which is a small router.
The plunge routers, you can put them on, you can set specific depths. Sometimes you need to take a cut where you're gonna plunge.
Let's just start with basic putting a bit in the damn thing.
Okay, basic put the bit in. You have, this one doesn't have a collet
That's a problem.
in it. A collet.
Collets have a variable size that matches the router bit shank.
the
There's
shank
either
of the
half
router
or a
bit.
quarter.
Router bits come pretty much in 1/2 inch and 1/4 inch shanks.
Each one requires a different collet.
And this is a 1/2 inch collet. And when tightened into the router, this collet compresses and grips the router bit. When you set a router bit,
The collet does not come completely off to put a new bit in. It just gets loosened.
loosens up. I'm not so sure about this one. See how that is spring compressed? There's a locking device here, and that will, when you loosen that, you can push this down.
Yeah,
That's
don't
for
have
plunging.
your face too close to that when you're releasing.
And that'll jump back up. You put the router bit. This router bit's not going to fit in this router. The router bit goes
Grab
into
another
the
smaller
collet.
bit
You push it down until it bottoms
and wrenches.
out, and then you want to raise it up just a little bit. It's better if the bottom of your shaft is not bottomed out in the collet. The vibration will sometimes cause them to move if they don't have freedom down here. So put it in until it goes click, and then just back it out a little bit. In order to do that, you can have the collet just kind of snug down on here far enough that it'll compress that collet just a little bit. It'll hold it in place. You can still slide it, but it's not tight.
Putting in a 1/8 inch round over bit.
With a 1/2 inch shank, it's
With a
a bit
1/2 inch
overkill.
shank. I got tired of changing the damn collet. We lose them. We're bad that way.
Yeah, this one's not working with that shit. So if you have that difficulty, you pull the collet off, put the router bit in, and then reassemble the collet into there. You don't have to be all the way down. Sometimes you want to set your router bit a little higher. You can elevate it, but don't. You have to keep like 3/4 of the shank in the collet to have.
Yeah,
a
you
good-
want to be at least to the bottom of that collet nut with the end of that shank, so that because
So-
you don't want you'd rather not throw the bit.
When you're tightening things, a real good habit to develop is to learn how to use your wrenches so that you can take your hand, like my hand is here, squeeze that together. That's enough. It won't move. It won't be impossible to get out. You won't eat the threads up. A good hand grip tightening will do it. Also, when you're doing this, if you slip off of there, you're gonna rip the end of your knuckle off on
You'll
the other
damage
one.
yourself.
You know, so you want this so that you can tighten it up like that. You know,
Single hand.
You don't need max force. You need enough to hold it, but you don't want to make it so it's impossible to get apart. And also, you will eventually wear out, cut threads in there. You can overpower. You know, you can do this. Use the same technique in reverse when loosening it. You have great control with your hands. You can loosen it rather than going like that. Be sure you get your wrenches well set in here so that you don't cut off the edges of the nuts eventually, then it becomes harder and harder to use the tool as you know, if you tear it up.
If you don't have the wrenches, you can use adjustable wrenches, crescent wrenches, but for God's sake, let us know that we need wrenches. We need the right tools to do this stuff efficiently.
And
a pipe wrench is not an acceptable option in this assembly.
Loose wrenches tear up the nuts. You really want the right one.
And nobody wants to tear up their nuts.
So, then when you're running the router, you have to set your height according to what kind of a cut you want. If you're looking to do a round over like here, you want this thing set, and this is what I really dislike about a plunge router, is that they're
It's difficult to have a fine adjustment
to set in that adjustment. But you want to, you know,
if you are fighting
sometimes
that,
you want this corner to cut, sometimes you want a simple round over on there.
So in that case, that bit could do
it could do an
square
OG.
cut to a round.
Who's got a
over.
Sharpie?
It can do, yeah, there you go.
Give me a Sharpie. It would be better to see.
Got it. So this is the bit.
Okay, you've got a router bit, looks like this, and it's got a cutter on it, it looks like that. So it's going to cut this round over that you see here. Now you can either cut it in so that here's your wood, and you get a nice little round over softening your corner, or you can cut it in like that, and it'll have a ball bearing down here. You can cut it in like that so you get a piece that looks like that. And in this other one, you'll get a piece that looks like that.
Depending on the depth.
Depending on what you want and how you set the router. You set the depth to get you whatever you want.
If you are fighting it, the final set, there are adjusting nuts here that restrain here. I need somebody to hold. They're separate, so if you're this one, if anything, it's a little bit deep. It's got to come up. So I'm gonna run to here, pop it. That's too much.
We will eventually set you up with a good D-handle router that's about 10 times as easy to adjust.
Yes, it's not as versatile. The plunge router's got some versatility to it, but
Plunge router is a router that I would use occasionally for specialty things. A D-handle router that has a twisting collet adjustment of the base to the body, I would use.
once you comprehend the plunge router, though, the D handle gets really easy.
Yeah. And I'll give you a clue. When you set up to cut a round over, because you're going to be cutting some roundovers today, right? Didn't I hear you guys discussing that? If you set that router so that it cuts in and does that, you set it too deep, it'll take you a long time to sand that out of there. You'd much rather be just a little shy of that and not make that sanding problem for yourself. Because you can real easy with a piece of sandpaper, if this cuts a little shy, you can run a piece of sandpaper over there just like that and be done. But this one will waste a lot of time for you.
Okay, from a safety issue, that's probably enough for this. This is a flesh tearer. It has a tendency to want to run on you sometimes. You want to, body positioning in everything we do is crucial. You don't have a bunch of shit underfoot. You don't have cords, you don't have wood scrap, okay? Wide stance, preferably one arm support. If you guys watch me work on a lot of what I do, you'll see me, I'm not sitting here trying to do this business, okay? You won't get good work. Here, consistent slow motion, just like sanding. There's nothing we do here really other than maybe stripping forms that's violent, okay? Because if you get your business down in here, it'll take you in and you'll be stumpy. Call you lefty. So be careful with them.
Do you want to go as far as climb cutting?
Um,
The direction.
Yeah, the direction you travel. Okay.
Something else too, real quick about safety. I know it seems kind of obvious to me and maybe others. Whenever you are switching, changing out your bits or putting in a bit,
Unplug the machine.
make sure it's unplugged. And that goes with any tool, in my opinion, except for maybe a palm sander, but even a belt sander.
the belt
or a
sander will
router.
run.
Yep. So that's a
Belt
general rule.
sanders burn in there.
They make abrasions, they don't
They're
cut.
painful. You get sucked into the back end of the belt sander.
Okay, so climb cutting.
Okay. The router always turns clockwise when you're looking at it from the top. So, as you run down a stick here, the router's going this way. If I run the router in this direction, I am cutting.
You're moving in the direction opposite.
And what that does is you're cutting out of the wood with the cutter. And that pulls the router into the cutter. That's an
It's the
isometric
safer
cut.
way to do it. It's more
It's
likely
more
to tear,
stable,
more likely to tear
more
out,
likely
however.
to tear out. And it pulls you in so you get the full cut. Now if you get tear out, or if you want to avoid tear out, you can do what's called a climb cut. But it puts a lot more responsibility on you, the operator, to control the tool.
Because it wants to
Because it
run
wants
away
to
from
run
you.
down. In other words, this thing's turning this way, and if I move this way, it wants to throw the stick, and it wants to run down the stick this way. So I have to work in opposition to the router, but I'm going to get a totally clean cut.
Sometimes you can get away with doing a shallow cut in the. Okay.
You won't be, because when you're climb cutting, the reason you don't get tear is that you're cutting into the wood rather than cutting out of the wood here. And
That's the
it pushes the router
the bits
off, so
that
you may not
for
get a
for
totally.
for clarity. That's the bits approach the angle where it contacts the wood first.
Right.
is what
Well,
you're-
it's really more where
Or
it's
it
doing on
exits.
its way
Where
out
it
of the
exits.
wood,
Yep.
where it exits the wood. But when you're climb cutting, you're cutting into the wood. When you're isometric cutting, you're cutting out of the wood. That's why you get the tear, because you're pulling the cutter out
The
of
exit of the cutting device out of the piece of wood is relevant on table saw, skill saw, chop saw. Thinking about if that blade is exiting your finished piece,
You can-
you're going to do damage unless your cutting tool is really sharp.
And so when you take that climb cut, the cutter is pushing the router away from the wood rather than pulling it into the wood. And you don't maybe get the full depth of cut. So you take a climb cut down here, and then you come back and take a cleansing cut in an isometric cut. You won't be cutting, you'll be cutting just a bare shave of wood. So you won't splinter, but you'll get the full depth of cut.
Do not
Mostly
hesitate.
You'll have to experience this to really understand.
Yeah, you'll have to feel it, but
Sometimes when you're given a router task, do it both ways and see what you get and see how it feels. Isometrics are stable. This is an isometric situation. I can push like this. But if I'm like pulling, I'm less stable than if I'm in opposition. And that's the difference between those two cuts. It's the same kind of thing.
this is one of the things as far as your setup. It's one thing if you have to do one piece and you want to clamp it, you'll probably have to move your clamp and stop your cut. If you're going to do multiple pieces, set up a jig of some sort. Get some other wood that's thinner perhaps, something that you can push against, right?
Yeah, you could tack a piece down, give yourself a fence
Yep.
to work with. The other thing is, if you're taking a tiny little cut like this one, get yourself a trim router that you can hold.
Trim
the-
router or
hold-
laminate trimmer.
Yeah, you get so that you're not having this big bulky thing for a tiny little cut. You can take a laminate trimmer or a trim router, and you can hold the stick with your hand
And control the
and
tool with
control
one
that
hand.
tool
It's small enough.
with one hand. You can't control this with one hand. It's a bad idea. And the other thing is you always want to, like Rob said, you want to get an arm down, or sometimes, you know, you can grip this in an alternative way. It's still safe, but you can keep something on the stable side so you're not tempted to tip the router like that.
Stability starts in your feet, and that's why I am such a stickler for not tripping over shit, having my work area tidy. Yeah, roundovers, tongue and groove, you can use it in substitution of a biscuit joiner with the right bit. And a router is the beginning of a shaper,
Right.
basically.